The Weeping Shadows. The first victim was found, suspended 12 feet above the pavement in Gotham's East End, caught in what appeared to be a web of pure darkness. Helena Bertinelli, the Huntress, crouched beside the chalk outline 3 hours later, her violet eyes scanning the impossible crime scene as dawn's pale fingers crept between the towering tenements. No rope burns, no ligature marks, Detective Harvey Bullock muttered, his breath forming small clouds in the October chill. Coroner says cause of death was terror, pure, distilled terror. Heart just stopped. Helena's gauntleted fingers traced the air where the shadows had held their victim. Even now, hours after the body had been cut down, she could feel something lingering, a presence that made her skin crawl beneath her midnight purple suit. The shadows here seemed deeper than they should be, clinging to the brick walls like living things. "What do you know about the Weeping Man?" she asked. Bullock's weathered face went pale. "Now why would you bring up that old ghost story?" "Because 3 witnesses saw something impossible last night. A figure made of shadows, crying tears that burned like acid. And because this is the 4th death this month with the same calling card." She gestured to the wall where someone, or something, had etched a symbol into the brick, a stylized eye weeping downward streaks. The detective lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "My grandmother used to tell that story. Said the Weeping Man was what happened when grief got so heavy it took on a life of its own. Feeds on sorrow, grows stronger with each tear shed. But that's just urban legend," Helena finished. "Until it isn't." She'd been tracking the pattern for weeks. The deaths all occurred in the same 6-block radius, always between midnight and dawn, always preceded by reports of sobbing echoing through empty streets. The victims were found in impossible positions, suspended in shadows that shouldn't exist, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror. As Bullock wandered off to interview witnesses who would tell him nothing useful, Helena activated the comm unit in her cowl. "Oracle, I need everything you can find on the Weeping Man legend. Historical accounts, documented sightings, anything." Barbara Gordon's voice crackled through the encrypted channel. "Already on it. The earliest recorded mention dates back to 1847. But there are gaps in the timeline. Long periods where the killings stop, then suddenly resume decades later. Almost like something goes dormant and then awakens. What triggers the awakening? Near as I can tell, tragedy. Mass tragedy. The 1918 flu pandemic, the stock market crash, 9/11. Each time Gotham bleeds, the Weeping Man returns to feed." Helena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. 3 weeks ago, a tenement fire had claimed 17 lives in this very neighborhood. Men, women, children. An entire extended family wiped out by faulty wiring and negligent landlords. The grief had been palpable, hanging over these streets like a shroud. That night, Helena perched on a fire escape overlooking Carmen Street, the epicenter of the deaths. She'd modified her costume with additional armor and weapons, though she suspected conventional tools would prove useless against something born of pure emotion. The crossbow on her back felt reassuring nonetheless. The shadows began to move at 12:43 a.m. At first it was subtle, darkness pooling in doorways where no light should cast shadows, creeping along walls with serpentine purpose. Then came the sound, a low keening wail that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the street. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant, and Helena's breath turned to frost. "Where does it hurt most, little Huntress?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Helena spun, crossbow raised, but found only writhing darkness. The shadows on the walls had taken on depth and substance, reaching toward her with grasping tendrils. "Show yourself," she called into the night. "I am always showing myself. I am in every tear shed in anger, every sob of despair. I am the grief that festers when justice fails." The voice was like broken glass wrapped in velvet. "You know me well, daughter of murdered parents." The shadows coalesced, 10 feet away, forming a humanoid figure of absolute darkness. Where its face should have been, 2 points of sickly yellow light burned like dying stars, and from those eyes tears of liquid shadow streamed down its form, hissing where they struck the pavement. "You're feeding on their grief," Helena said, understanding flooding through her. "The fire victims' families, their friends. You're making it worse, aren't you? Amplifying their pain." "Grief is the most honest emotion," the Weeping Man replied, gliding closer. "It cannot be faked, cannot be hidden. And when it grows strong enough, it becomes me. These people call out for justice, for someone to pay for their losses. I simply collect the debt." Helena's finger tightened on the crossbow trigger. "By murdering innocents." "Innocents?" The creature's laugh was like wind through a graveyard. "The landlord who cut corners on safety equipment. The inspector who took bribes to overlook violations. The city councilman who voted against fire safety regulations. I only take those who help dig these graves." The bolt flew straight and true, passing harmlessly through the shadow form. The Weeping Man didn't even pause. "Violence will not serve you here, little Huntress. I am not flesh to be pierced, not bone to be broken. I am the consequence of actions, the weight of guilt made manifest. The creature raised one shifting hand, and darkness erupted from every shadow on the street. But you carry such beautiful grief, the memory of blood on cathedral stones, of prayers that went unanswered. Let me taste that pain. The shadows struck like living whips, wrapping around Helena's arms and legs. She felt herself lifted from the fire escape, suspended in a web of darkness that pulsed with malevolent hunger. The creature's touch was ice and despair, dredging up memories she'd buried deep, her father's lifeless eyes, her mother's final scream, the helplessness of an 8-year-old girl who couldn't save anyone. Yes, the weeping man whispered, drawing closer. Such exquisite agony, you've carried it so long, polished it to a razor's edge. But what if you could let it go? What if the pain could serve a purpose? For a moment, Helena almost surrendered. The weight of years pressed down on her. Every criminal she'd failed to stop, every victim she'd arrived too late to save. The grief was so heavy, so familiar, it would be easy to let it flow out of her, to feed this creature of shadows and finally know peace. Then she remembered Barbara's research, the pattern, the gaps. You're not just feeding, she gasped, struggling against the shadow bonds. You're growing. Each death makes you stronger, more real. But you can't maintain that power indefinitely, can you? That's why you go dormant. The grief eventually heals, and you starve. The creature's grip tightened. Clever little huntress, but grief is eternal. It merely changes form. No, Helena said, her voice growing stronger. Grief transforms. It becomes something else, something you can't touch. She thought of her father, not his death but his life, the way he'd read to her before bed, his gentle hands showing her how to load a crossbow, his pride when she'd mastered a difficult lesson. The grief was still there, would always be there, but alongside it lived something else, gratitude for the time they'd had, determination to honor his memory, love that death couldn't diminish. The shadow bonds began to weaken. The families aren't just grieving, Helena continued, feeling strength return to her limbs. They're also remembering, celebrating lives lived, sharing stories, finding comfort in each other. That's what you can't stand, isn't it? When grief becomes something else, you lose your power. Silence, the weeping man's form flickered, becoming less substantial. Grief is all there is, pain is the only truth. Helena broke free of the shadows, dropping to the pavement in a crouch. You're wrong, and that's why you'll never win. She activated her comm unit. Oracle, patch me through to every emergency broadcast system in the city. Radio, TV, everything. Helena, what are you? Just do it. The connection crackled to life, and Helena's voice echoed from every speaker in Gotham. This is Huntress. I'm speaking to the families and friends of those lost in the Carmen Street fire. I know you're hurting. I know the grief feels like it might swallow you whole. But I also know that your loved ones were more than their final moments. They were laughter and love and 1,000 small kindnesses. They were stories worth telling and memories worth cherishing. The weeping man shrieked, his form growing translucent. What are you doing? I'm reminding them, Helena said, her voice carrying across the city. To everyone listening, share those stories. Talk about the good times. Remember what you're grateful for, not just what you've lost. Grief shared is grief diminished, and love remembered is love eternal. Across Gotham, lights began flickering on in windows. People emerged onto fire escapes, into courtyards, gathering in small groups. They began to talk, tentatively at first, then with growing warmth. Stories of the departed, memories long cherished, moments of joy that death couldn't steal. The weeping man's scream became a whisper, then silence. His form dissolved like smoke in sunlight, the shadows returning to their natural positions. The temperature rose, and somewhere in the distance a church bell chimed 4 a.m. Helena stood alone on the empty street, feeling the weight of her own grief shift and settle into something more bearable. The pain was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined her. It was part of her story, not the ending of it. Oracle, she said quietly into her comm, I'm here. That was beautiful, Helena. Any sign of our shadow friend? Negative. Energy readings are back to normal. I think you did it. You found a way to starve it. Helena looked up at the lightening sky, where the first hints of dawn painted the clouds in shades of hope. In the windows around her, people were still talking, still sharing, still transforming their grief into something the weeping man could never touch. We all did, she said, and for the first time in years, Helena Bertinelli smiled at the sunrise. The weeping man was gone, banished by the simple act of remembering that even in the darkest shadows, light could still find a way to shine. And in Gotham City, where legends were born from the marriage of hope and darkness, a new story began to spread, not of a creature that fed on grief, but of the communities that chose to heal together, and the huntress who reminded them that love was stronger than loss. The shadows returned to being merely shadows, and life went on.